Emily didn't pack a suitcase. She took a small backpack, her car keys, and left her childhood home before the sun came up. The house was quiet, too quiet, like it was holding its breath. By the time her parents sat down for breakfast, they were already rewriting the story. They told relatives Emily had abandoned them for money. What they never mentioned was what happened the night before. Emily was 30, but sitting at the kitchen table made her feel 16 again. Her parents sat across from her, their faces calm, rehearsed. "Your brother needs help," her mother said gently, folding her hands. Her father nodded like this was already settled. They didn't ask. They demanded the $150,000 her grandmother had given Emily for her future. Not for an emergency. Not for survival. But to erase her brother Mark's debts again. When Emily said no, the smiles vanished. Her father's voice dropped. "You need to think carefully," he warned. The house suddenly felt unfamiliar, like it no longer belonged to her. That night, Emily realized something painful. Leaving wouldn't end the problem. It would only begin it. Now, years later, Emily had a steady professional job, her own apartment, and a life that finally felt like it belonged to her. But growing up, she had always been the easy one. The quiet daughter. The one who didn't argue because arguing never changed anything. Her family lived in a middle-class neighborhood in a Pennsylvania city. From the outside, everything looked perfect. Trim lawn. Matching photo frames. Holiday cards sent on time. Inside, everything revolved around her older brother, Mark. He was 7 years older and treated like proof that her parents had succeeded at life. When Mark tried a business idea, they called it ambition. When it failed, they blamed bad luck. The market was rough, her father always said. When Emily worked late, saved carefully, or earned promotions, her mother just nodded. "You're independent," she'd say quickly before changing the subject. It sounded like praise, but it wasn't. It meant Emily didn't need anything. And because she didn't need anything, she was expected to give everything. The only person who ever truly saw Emily was her grandmother, Ruth. Ruth lived a few states away in a quiet Massachusetts town, in an old house that always smelled like coffee and baked fruit. When Emily visited, Ruth really listened. "Tell me about your work," Ruth would say, setting 2 mugs on the table. "What do you want for yourself?" Sitting at her grandmother's kitchen table felt like exhaling after holding her breath all year. A few months before everything fell apart, Ruth invited Emily for a weekend. They cooked together, folded laundry side by side, and talked late into the night. On Emily's last morning, Ruth handed her an envelope. "No speech. No conditions. This is for your future," Ruth said quietly. "You decide how to use it." Inside was $150,000. Enough to change Emily's life. Enough to help her shift her career the way she'd been planning in silence for years. Emily cried not because of the number, but because someone trusted her without strings. Emily went home believing, for once, that something good could exist without conditions. He was wrong. The shift happened almost immediately. The day after she returned, her mother asked, "Can we talk for a minute?" Her voice had that careful sweetness Emily recognized. Her father was already sitting at the kitchen table. Mark leaned against the counter, scrolling on his phone. "Your brother's been under a lot of pressure," her mother began. Emily stayed silent. She'd heard that sentence her whole life. Her father cleared his throat. "Some things didn't work out." Mark finally looked up. "It's temporary," he said casually. Numbers followed. Debts. Payments. Deadlines. No one asked Emily about her visit. No one mentioned her plans. Her mother leaned forward. "We think the money Ruth gave you could really help right now." Emily blinked. "Help who?" Her mother frowned. "Your brother, of course. Family helps family." Mark shrugged. "You're good with money," he said. "You'll figure it out." That's when Emily understood. They weren't asking. They were deciding. Emily tried to stay calm. "That money is for my future," she said carefully. Her father's jaw tightened. "You can adjust your plans," he replied. "Your brother doesn't have that flexibility." Something inside Emily hardened. "Why is it always me?" she asked quietly. Her mother's face stiffened. "Because you're strong," she said. "Don't make this dramatic." Mark scoffed. "You're acting like this is a betrayal." Emily looked at him. "It is," she said. The room went silent. Not awkward, dangerous. Her father pushed his chair back. Think very carefully about your answer. Emily heard the message clearly. Obey or lose what little belonging she had left. That night she lay awake replaying every word. By morning she was clear. If she gave in now she wouldn't just lose the money. She would lose herself. The next evening she said one word. No, and everything changed. The reaction was immediate. Emily's mother's voice dropped first. Don't be selfish, she said sharply. We raised you better than that. Her father didn't raise his voice at all, which somehow felt worse. You're choosing money over your family, he said calmly. Mark laughed under his breath. You'll get over this, he muttered. You always do. The pressure didn't stop there. They reminded Emily of everything they'd ever done for her. School fees. A place to live. We sacrificed for you, her mother said, her eyes shining. This is how you repay us. Emily felt herself shrinking the way she always had. For a moment she almost nodded just to make it stop. Then she caught herself. She pushed her chair back and stood. I'm not giving Mark that money, she said. And I'm done explaining myself. The room went cold. Her father stepped closer. If you walk away from this, he warned, don't expect things to stay the same. Emily went to her room and closed the door, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. Minutes later her phone buzzed. Then buzzed again. Messages from her parents. From Mark. Guilt layered with threats. Love twisted into obligation. You're tearing this family apart, one message read. Think about what you're doing, another said. Emily sat on her bed and looked around the room she'd grown up in. The walls were covered with photos that never quite felt like her. That's when it hit her clear and terrifying. They weren't angry because they loved her. They were angry because they couldn't control her. Emily waited until the house went quiet. No shouting. No slammed doors. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock in the hallway. She pulled a backpack from her closet and packed slowly. Clothes. Documents. Her laptop. The envelope from Ruth stayed flat between notebooks. Every sound felt louder than it should have been. At the front door Emily paused. For a moment she wondered if anyone would notice. If anyone would stop her. No one did. The night air hit her face like a shock. She sat in her car, hands gripping the steering wheel, shaking. You're not running, she whispered to herself. You're choosing. She drove without a destination at first, just distance. Mile after mile passed in silence. By the time the sky began to lighten, she knew exactly where she was going. She stopped at a quiet cafe just outside the city, ordered coffee she didn't drink and sat staring out the window. Her phone stayed off. The silence felt unreal, like the calm after something breaks. By late afternoon, Emily pulled into Ruth's driveway in Massachusetts. Before she could knock, the door opened. Ruth stood there, her eyes soft but steady. You came, she said quietly. Emily didn't answer. She stepped inside and let the door close behind her. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and something warm baking in the oven. It was the safest place Emily knew. They sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Ruth had handed her the envelope. Emily's hands shook as she spoke. She told her grandmother everything. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't dramatize it. She just told the truth. Ruth didn't interrupt. When Emily finished, the room stayed quiet. Finally Ruth spoke. I wondered how long it would take, she said. Emily looked up. You knew. Ruth nodded. Patterns repeat when no one stops them. She walked to the window. Your parents use money to avoid responsibility. And Mark learned early he'd never have to stand on his own. Emily swallowed. They're telling people I abandoned them. Ruth nodded calmly. They called me this morning. They said you were unstable. Emily's chest tightened. That's not true. Ruth reached across the table and covered Emily's hand. I know, she said. Because if it were, you wouldn't be sitting here afraid to breathe. Emily barely slept that night, not from fear, but from knowing something was coming. It arrived the next afternoon. She was helping Ruth sort mail when the doorbell rang. Ruth didn't hesitate. She opened the door. Emily's parents stood on the porch. Mark was behind them. Her mother rushed forward. Emily, she said breathlessly. Thank God. We've been worried sick. Emily stayed where she was. Her father stepped inside without waiting to be invited. This has gone far enough, he said, scanning the room. You embarrassed us. Mark didn't look at Emily. He looked at Ruth. We need to talk, he said. Ruth closed the door behind them. The sound echoed. "No," she said firmly. "You need to listen." The room stilled. Emily realized then that this moment, the one she'd always avoided, had finally arrived. And this time she wouldn't face it alone. Ruth stood between them like a quiet wall. "Sit down," she said, her voice calm but unmovable. Emily's mother hesitated, then lowered herself into a chair, smoothing her jacket as if this were a formal visit. Emily's father remained standing for a moment before sitting stiffly across from Ruth. Mark leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "We didn't come to fight," Emily's mother said quickly. "Things were misunderstood." Ruth tilted her head. "You meant the money," she replied. The words landed heavy. Emily's father frowned. "We meant family support." Ruth's lips pressed together. "You meant control." Mark scoffed. "That's not fair," he said. "I'm trying to keep my business afloat." Ruth looked at him steadily. "With whose money?" Silence answered her. Emily finally spoke. "You told people I stole it," she said. Her mother waved a hand. "We said you overreacted." "You said I ran away," Emily replied. "Because you did," her father snapped. Ruth didn't raise her voice. She walked to the sideboard and picked up a thick folder Emily hadn't noticed before. She placed it on the table and opened it slowly. "Every time I helped you," Ruth said, "I documented it." She turned pages as she spoke. Every bill. Every transfer. Every promise. Emily's father's face drained of color. "I asked you years ago to stop enabling Mark," Ruth continued. "You promised me you would." Emily's mother's voice shook. "We were just helping our son." Ruth looked up. "You were avoiding consequences." Mark stepped forward. "She didn't need all that money," he said bitterly. That was when Ruth's voice sharpened. "She needed dignity." Mark froze. "You've had chances she never did," Ruth said. "And you wasted them." Emily's father slammed his hand on the table. "You're turning her against us." Ruth didn't flinch. "You did that yourselves." Ruth turned to Emily. "Tell them," she said gently. Emily took a breath. "I didn't insult you," she said. "I didn't threaten you. I just refused." Her mother's eyes filled with tears. "We raised you," she said. Emily nodded. "And I grew up." Mark laughed bitterly. "So that's it? We're supposed to fail?" Ruth met his gaze. "Yes," she said simply. The word hung in the air. "You will fail," Ruth continued. "And you will learn or you won't. But I will not save you anymore." Emily's father shook his head. "You can't do this." Ruth closed the folder. "I already have." She stood straighter. "Effective immediately, all financial support ends." Emily's mother gasped. "You're choosing her over us?" Ruth's expression softened just slightly. "No," she said. "I'm choosing honesty over manipulation." Mark's confidence cracked. "You're ruining everything," he snapped. Ruth's voice dropped. "No," she said. "I'm refusing to be used." Emily's father turned to her, eyes hard. "If you walk away now, don't expect to come back." Emily didn't hesitate. "I already walked away." The room went silent. Ruth closed the folder and gestured toward the door. "This conversation is over." Emily's parents left without another word. Mark slammed the door on his way out. Emily's mother didn't look back. Emily stood there, shaking as the adrenaline drained from her body. Ruth placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're safe," she said quietly. Emily exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. That night they sat at the kitchen table again. Ruth poured tea. Emily cried not because she'd lost her family, but because she'd stopped letting them take pieces of her. The weeks that followed were quiet but not peaceful. Calls came first angry, then desperate, then carefully sweet. Emily didn't answer. Silence was the only boundary they respected. Ruth handled the rest. Without the safety net, Mark's life unraveled quickly. His business collapsed. He moved back in with their parents, boxes in hand. Stress filled the house where excuses once lived. Emily watched from a distance as the power dynamic shifted, not through revenge but through truth. Life with Ruth moved at a gentler pace. Mornings were slow. Afternoons were simple. Emily slept better. She laughed without checking the room first. She began planning her future without calculating how much of it she'd be expected to give away. One evening Ruth looked at her and said, "They're learning." Emily nodded. And if they don't, Ruth smiled softly, that won't be your burden anymore. Distance changed everything. Emily didn't feel strong right away, but she felt lighter. Without constant demands, her thoughts became her own. She started waking up without dread. Small things felt new again, choosing what to eat, where to go, how to spend her time. One morning, Ruth noticed Emily lingering over her coffee. You're quieter, Ruth said. Emily smiled faintly. I'm not bracing anymore. Ruth nodded. That's what peace feels like at first. Emily began redirecting her career, enrolling in a certification she'd postponed for years. No one questioned her choices. No one asked what she could give instead. For the first time, her success wasn't a family resource. It was simply hers. Updates about her parents came indirectly. A cousin mentioned the house was tense. A neighbor said her parents had sold things they once treated as untouchable. Mark argued more. Failed louder. They're angry, Emily said one evening. Ruth stirred soup calmly. Anger comes before responsibility, she replied. Emily felt guilt flicker then fade. She had spent too long carrying what wasn't hers. One afternoon, Emily found an old photo album. Pictures of holidays, birthdays, smiles that felt rehearsed now. Was it ever real? Emily asked quietly. Ruth met her gaze. Love can be real and still be unhealthy, she said. Both things can exist. That truth settled deep. Months passed. Emily moved into her own apartment, small, clean, entirely hers. She called Ruth the first night. I'm scared, Emily admitted. Ruth chuckled softly. Good, she said. That means you're growing. Emily hung art she liked, cooked meals without criticism, invited friends without explaining herself. Her phone stayed quiet. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt protective. When her mother finally left a voicemail, soft, apologetic, carefully worded, Emily listened once and didn't respond. Not out of spite but clarity. Some conversations didn't deserve reopening. One evening, Ruth visited Emily's apartment. She looked around slowly. You did this, she said proudly. Emily nodded. I didn't know freedom could be this quiet. Ruth smiled. The loud part is the lie that tells you you're wrong for wanting it. Emily thought about the girl she used to be, careful, shrinking, accommodating. I thought being a good daughter meant disappearing, she said. Ruth shook her head. Being good never meant being small. Emily felt something settle permanently inside her. Not anger. Not triumph. Resolution. Emily never got the apology she once thought she needed. And she realized she didn't need it anymore. Her family didn't collapse because she said no. They simply stopped leaning on her. And that was never her job to begin with. On a quiet night, Emily sat alone, city lights glowing outside her window. She whispered the truth aloud just to hear it. Walking away wasn't abandonment. It was survival. The words felt solid. Final. Emily's life wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And for the first time it was entirely her own. Emily stopped checking for updates after a while. The need to know faded naturally, like a habit she no longer needed. Her parents' lives continued somewhere else, shaped by choices she didn't make anymore. What surprised her most was how little anger she felt. There was grief, yes, but grief for what never existed, not for what she lost. One night a friend asked, "Do you think they'll ever understand?" Emily thought for a moment. "Maybe," she said. "But understanding isn't required for me to move on." At work, Emily began to thrive in ways she hadn't expected. Without constant emotional drain, her focus sharpened. Her manager noticed. "You've changed," he said during a review. "More confident." Emily smiled politely. She didn't explain that confidence wasn't something she gained, it was something she stopped giving away. Promotions came slowly, steadily. Each step felt earned, not borrowed against someone else's failure. The money Ruth gave her stayed exactly where it belonged, invested in Emily's future. Education. Growth. Security. Every decision Emily made with it felt intentional. "You're honoring it," Ruth said once. Emily nodded. "I finally understand why you trusted me." Ruth smiled. "I always knew you would." Months turned into a year. Emily's parents sent one final message, carefully written, heavy with implication. "We miss you. Families forgive." Emily read it twice, then set her phone down. Forgiveness wasn't the issue. Accountability was. And she no longer needed to argue that point. Silence wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. Mark resurfaced briefly through a mutual contact. He'd taken a job he once would have considered beneath him. He's angry, the contact said. Emily shrugged gently. Anger is allowed. What wasn't allowed anymore was access. Emily wished him no harm, but she also wished him no rescue. Emily and Ruth continued their quiet rituals. Weekly dinners. Long walks. Conversations that didn't rush. One evening, Emily said, I used to think strength meant enduring everything. Ruth shook her head. Strength is knowing when endurance becomes self-betrayal. Emily began telling her story selectively, not as a confession but as context. People listened. Some recognized themselves in it. I thought it was just my family, one woman said. Emily replied softly, it never is. Speaking the truth no longer scared her. It grounded her. When Emily finally bought a larger apartment, she invited Ruth over first. They stood in the doorway together. You built this, Ruth said. Emily smiled. I protected it. The difference mattered. There were moments, quiet ones, when Emily still felt the ache of absence. Holidays. Birthdays. But the ache no longer controlled her. She had learned that missing people didn't mean returning to harm. One night, Emily caught her reflection in the mirror and paused. She looked older. Calmer. Like someone who trusted herself. You did it, she whispered. Not loudly. Not triumphantly. Just honestly. Emily never confronted her parents again. There was nothing left to explain. She had already said the hardest word, no, and survived it. Years later, when asked about her family, Emily answered simply. We're distant. No bitterness. No drama. Just truth. The story didn't end with reconciliation or apology. It ended with ownership. Emily owned her time. Her future. Her worth. She had once believed love required sacrifice without limits. Now she understood something deeper. Love without respect isn't love, it's control. Emily didn't leave her family because she wanted more. She left because she finally understood she was already enough. And choosing herself wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning. Moral lesson. Love that demands your future is not love. Setting boundaries is not abandonment, it is self-respect. And choosing yourself is not selfish. It is survival.